Good day to members of the media and the listening public. Bermuda's economy continues to trend in a positive direction. The third quarter GDP estimates indicate that the economy has expanded by at least 4.2% in nominal terms over the first 3 quarters of 2022. In real terms, the inflation-adjusted economy is estimated to have grown by at least 1.4% over the first 3 quarters of 2022. Real GDP in the first quarter of 2022 has been revised upwards from a 3.9% increase to a 5.2% increase. And second quarter GDP has been revised upwards from a reported 1.7% contraction to a 3.9% increase in quarterly GDP. The changes in the first and second quarter GDP are partly because of normal revisions and partly due to computational errors with the exports of travel services in the balance of payments and international investment position, which impacted the exports of services for the quarterly GDP. Despite the strong positive growth in the first half of 2022, after adjusting for inflation, the GDP in constant prices decreased by 5% in the third quarter of 2022. The level of economic contraction was a direct result of lower government consumption, a decrease in investments, strong imports of goods, and inflationary pressure. GDP in current prices declined by 0.7% during the third quarter. Consumer spending in the third quarter increased 1.2% year over year to $787.4 million. Consumption of services increased by 2.6% year over year, reflected in higher expenditure for accommodation services, air transport, and personal care services. Employment income in the third quarter was 4.4% above 2021 levels. Industries such as hotels, restaurants, international business, and wholesale and retail reported strong growth in employee remuneration. Tourism arrivals and expenditure were up as Bermuda's tourism industry reopened for leisure and business visitors. The island hosted 39,302 air visitors during the third quarter of 2022, up from 35,506 in the third quarter of 2021. Estimated expenditure by air visitors increased to $75.3 million from $61.5 million recorded in the third quarter of last year. Consumption by government declined 5.7% during the quarter, with lower expenditure on materials, supplies, and insurance payments. Business investment. Furthermore, gross capital formation declined 16.8% to $197.6 million. Investment related to construction fell 8%, while investment in machinery and equipment decreased 24.5%. Due to lower imports of office furniture and equipment, industrial machine parts, and motor vehicles. Total business registration increased by 2.2% year over year, bringing the complete business register to 16,199. There were 218 new businesses registered in Bermuda during the third quarter of 2022, a decline of 6% from the previous year. While the government continues to facilitate the expansion and sustainability of Bermuda's economy, we also recognize the critical role of employers, business owners, and consumers alike. High levels of inflation continue to place pressure on the economy's growth. Despite this, the government will continue to create an environment that encourages economic growth while providing opportunities for Bermudians. For more information, please review the Quarter 3 2022 Quarterly GDP by Expenditure publication available at the Department of Statistics online website at gov.bm. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. At this time, we welcome questions from the media.
Good afternoon, Minister. Thank you for holding this. So that's a disappointing third quarter number to see a contraction in real terms after the growth in the first half of the year. Primarily the cause was partly inflation and partly lower government consumption. What is the outlook for the fourth quarter?
I believe that if we look at this is a lagging indicator, and if we look at the current indicators regarding government revenue, the job growth, the payroll tax receipts received by the government, the tourism sector and the number of tourists that actually arrived in the island and the level of expenditure, all being up, I think that the fourth quarter will trend in a positive direction. The growth in the first half of the year was extremely robust and being revised upwards means that you will have a weaker quarter. And so I believe that the third quarter was a weaker quarter. However, the contraction in nominal terms was only 0.7%. But when we look at the inflation associated with that, it had a larger contraction. You should also note that the third quarter inflation rate was higher than all other quarters as well.
Right, and it trended off slightly since. So, with those numbers, is the government still holding to the 3.4% to 3.9% projection for GDP for the whole year that was stated in the budget statement? Was that in constant prices or is that nominal?
That's actually in real.
That is real.
Yes, and so mostly when we make predictions or estimations, they're always in real terms. I believe if you look at the trend between quarterly GDP numbers and then we look at the annual publication, the annual GDP normally performs better than your quarterly indicators. And so I think that the direction that the Ministry of Finance has set in terms of the economic projections are on track.
So does that mean that we're going to see the economy, again, in real terms, return to the same size that it was in 2019 or slightly ahead, or is it still lagging behind?
We're certainly trending in that direction.
Okay. I guess the broader question is that even though the economy, the numbers, even with that poor quarter, even though the numbers are fairly strong, an awful lot of people still would say that they're not really feeling the benefits of that growth. What kind of message can you give to them or give them about where you think things are heading?
I think the challenges that people are experiencing are as a direct result of inflation, and inflation eroding their purchasing power. And so when goods are more expensive in the economy, there's a contraction in people's spending ability, and that has a direct impact on how they feel the economy is actually doing. But from an economic standpoint, in terms of the overall economy and whether or not the economy is expanding and creating jobs and creating more opportunities, we have to come to the conclusion that that is the case. There is a disconnect between economic performance and how residents will feel based off of their purchasing power, but you will see a number of measures that the government has put in place to support households to increase their purchasing power, and further measures through the reduction of taxes, especially payroll taxes, to support households.
Yeah, but even the payroll tax reduction, I mean, for a lower paid person, it's a matter of a couple of $100, which obviously is great, but it doesn't necessarily make a material difference in their lives over any period of months.
I think if you look at this one tax change in isolation, you may come to that conclusion, but over the last 4 years, I think it's significant reduction in taxes that an individual will pay. The payroll tax being only one of a number of measures that we've put in place to directly support individuals.
Okay. I wanted to actually ask you a slightly different thing, but I think it's related. Generally speaking, the banks have been increasing their interest rates in response to interest hikes overseas, and obviously to some degree as a counter to inflation. But that in turn obviously is putting quite a lot of pressure on anyone particularly anyone who's a borrower, which has to have a dampening effect on the economy as well. And at the same time, we've seen the local banks making quite, well, exceptionally healthy profits. The BMA said that in the third quarter of last year, the banks made a collective net profit of $97 million, and I think Bank of Butterfield put out their annual results, which I think were $200 million shortly. In your view, the increase in interest rates a helpful thing for the economy, or is there something that, or would it be more helpful if they were being held more in check?
So I believe that globally, central banks use the interest rates to ease the spending in the economy to get in front of inflation. Bermuda we lag in terms of our banks falling in line with what they're doing in overseas jurisdictions, and the factors surrounding inflation in those jurisdictions are different from ours. The mortgage increases that residents have to pay is something of concern, and it is eroding those individuals' purchasing power. However, when we look at overall consumption and overall remuneration of households, it is still relatively strong. And there is an anomaly or something we see within the consumer price index or the retail sales index in particular, where we see a lesser volume of goods being purchased, but the gross receipts of those establishments still increasing. And that is as a direct result of inflation. And so we see where it is directly impacting our economy, but consumer spending still remains robust in Bermuda.
I mean, obviously the budget's now already underway, but some countries have looked at windfall taxes on banks because of this increase in profits that's entirely due to net interest gains and not necessarily because of anything the banks have done themselves to improve their position. Is that something the government might look at in the future if we stay in this rising interest rate, high inflation environment for a longer period?
I think we'll be reviewing our entire tax system soon.
Right.
And the Premier Minister of Finance has indicated that nothing is off the table. I think an important thing to note is what we generally want to do is shift the level of taxation from households and residents and put more on corporations.
Which of course has its own problems, because if you disincentivize corporations, then that can lead to reductions in job creation and so forth as well.
Yes, but I think if you looked at what we attempted to do in this current budget, we actually reduced taxes on both portions of individuals. We reduced payroll taxes for employers and we reduced payroll tax for employees in an effort to create an environment for greater levels of growth.
The other thing that in the retail sales, not so much in November, but previously, were these fairly dramatic, over the last year or so, increases in overseas declarations of overseas purchases, which now I think are up to about, well, in November I think we're 30 million in the month, and in October the increase in spending in that segment was the same as for the rest of the retail sector, according to the index, which obviously doesn't necessarily cover every single shop in Bermuda. Is that a concern? Not so much because people obviously are going to buy where they think they can be most efficient, but because of the effect that has on economic activity and job creation and the retail sector generally?
The shift towards global e-commerce is a worldwide trend, and we see that happening in many jurisdictions where global e-commerce is replacing brick and mortar within our economy. Notwithstanding that, we still want to see a strong and robust wholesale and retail sector in Bermuda. And so we will continue to work with our local retailers to support them as best as we possibly can. But I don't think that you're going to see reverse in that particular trend moving forward.
Okay.
That's still and the overseas declarations are still a relatively small portion of retail sales.
Yeah, but it's the rate of increase, I think, that would be a concern. Also,
Yes.
that's a lot of money that leaves Bermuda without any sort of stickiness. You know, none of that is going to pay local wages, or very little of it is going to pay local wages or rents or shop fit outs or anything like that. So one has to think that the long-term effects aren't positive.
No, I think global competition is not, in terms of e-commerce, is not generally positive for small island jurisdictions like Bermuda.
Right.
But we've seen this trend in other areas in terms of expenditure on tourism externally. The Bermuda residents spend huge portions of income offshore rather than within the domestic economy. And we do want to encourage more of that to take place.
Okay. I'm nearly there. One final question, and I think this may have been affected by COVID. Historically, your ministry has done the employment survey, which you obviously know how that works, but it also did the labor survey, which was the phone survey to try to calculate the unemployment rate. That seems to have stopped. At least I couldn't find one since about 2020 on the government website. If it has stopped, is it going to be resumed? Because obviously that's a helpful number to know in terms of unemployment.
So it has not stopped. We did do a labor force survey in the first quarter of this year.
Okay.
We will also do a labor force survey, a second labor force survey in this calendar year as well.
And I guess on a related note, and this really is my last question, the last census, which wasn't a full one, was in 2016. What is the plan for the census?
I think we're still on track to have a census every 10 years, and so the next census will be 2026.
Okay, good. Thank you very much.
Afternoon, Minister.
Good afternoon.
So looking at the, you said that the economy is moving in a positive direction. What would be the greatest contributor to us moving towards those 2019 numbers?
I think that we should be extremely encouraged by the growth in employment numbers. The preliminary employment numbers show that there were additional 400 employees within the economy, which is extremely positive.
And what proportion of those would be Bermudian?
1/4,
Okay.
and so there were over 100 new jobs created for Bermudians.
Okay.
And just to put it in context, the reference week is actually in August. So we anticipated during the second and third quarters of 2022 that the employment numbers improved even further.
Thank you. So it ties into the budget, but the OBA had petitioned for 10,000 new jobs to be added to the economy. How aggressively is the government working towards that? Do you have a set target?
Yes, we did put out a report in terms of the challenges that we would experience with the aging population. I believe in that particular report, we did set a target of over 8,000 jobs by 2026. We then launched public consultation to get feedback from the entire community and specific stakeholders within the community to put forward suggestions as to how we can best achieve that. We received a number of recommendations, and we will put out a full economic development strategy, which would include areas such as local business and international business, retention and expansion, execution of ERP, workforce development, marketing, and attracting investment into Bermuda. Because in order to get 8,000 more workers, we need 8,000 more jobs. In order to get 8,000 more jobs, we need businesses to either come into the business environment and open up, or we need expansion from our local businesses.
How would you describe some of the feedback you've received?
I'm encouraged by the feedback that is received thus far. A lot of it has to do primarily with immigration, and we've got a committee together with all of the economic development organizations in Bermuda working together to put together a fulsome strategy.
Okay. Speaking of collaboration with IB to generate more, to attract more jobs to our shores, with immigration fees increasing by I think 5%, is there, do you think that that might be a hindrance at all?
No, I don't think it pushes it past a point of where it becomes a prohibitor to job growth. And so we still continue to see strong expansion from our international business community. As I meet with companies within the sector, they have growth, local growth and expansion plans. And so I'm extremely encouraged by what I heard on the ground, and I'm also extremely encouraged by what I see in terms of the numbers that are actually being recorded.
Thank you. And just lastly, you mentioned new policy revisions to the economic investment certificate. In terms of those who apply can be granted residency under 5 years, so they don't have to wait to that limit. Do you have a dollar figure attached to what that could mean in terms of investment?
Not necessarily, but we did put out that over $370 million has been associated with the program thus far. And by having consultation with stakeholders, I believe that this change makes the policy a little bit more attractive. And as a result, we should see the trend continue in terms of persons want to invest in Bermuda to obtain residency.
Sure. Do you foresee this potentially squeezing out Bermudians' access to real estate if it is a quite attractive program?
No, not necessarily. I think the price points, we see the price points in terms of the real estate purchase being valued over the $2.5 million mark for most of the purchases, and that's generally out of the range of the average Bermudian.
Okay. Thank you, Minister.
Okay, thank you all. That was the final question from the media. I'd like to thank the Minister and the media for attending and the public for watching this press conference. That is the end, and everybody have a great day.
Thank you.